Welcome to Transform Now, the podcast brought to you by SS&C Blue Prism. Agentic automation isn't just the next step in automation, it's the future of how work gets done. By enabling intelligent, autonomous agents to take action, adapt, and collaborate, organizations are unlocking new levels of productivity, growth, and customer delight. Join us as we explore how agentic automation is reshaping work for the better, for customers, employees, shareholders, and most importantly, you. To stay on top of the hottest topics in the world of agentic automation, subscribe now. Let's get into the show.
Hello, everyone. I'm Michael Marchuk. Welcome to the Transform Now podcast. Our guest on this episode is Richard Skellett, Chief Analyst for Research and Design at Bloor Research. Richard is known for challenging how we think about work, value, and technology, especially in the age of AI. He's been exploring ideas like fusion work, which I imagine we're going to hear about today, as well as digital operating models and how businesses can reinvent themselves to stay ahead. So welcome, Richard.
Oh, delighted to be here, Michael, and thank you so much for the invitation.
I'm super glad you're here. This is going to be a fun conversation. So I obviously with that intro, I didn't cover half of what you are and who you are. So maybe you can give us a little bit more insight into who you are, Richard.
Yeah, so I'm the Chief Analyst Research Design, as you mentioned, at Bloor Research. So Bloor has, for the audience, 5 decades of pre and post analysis on technology. So it kind of goes off and gives us a fantastic kind of backstory in terms of being able to look at what's happened in the past. And essentially, research and analysis leads into product design, product marketing. So, Bloor, we get involved in doing that. I'm a designer at heart,
Okay.
all right? And we'll probably go a little bit into that when we probably develop the conversation. And then from there, from research, analysis, and design, it takes us into having to build things, operate things, and transfer. So Bloor works across the enterprise and the vendor space, sitting in between, predominantly working with vendors.
Gotcha.
Helping them to kind of tell their story a bit better, helping them with their products and services.
Well, I imagine now, since everybody is an AI company, you're probably pretty busy.
Yeah, we pressed the reset in our business, which I think might be something could be quite interesting. Due to AI, AI changed everything. So we decided in Bloor, hey, we're in the research analyst business. Lots of questions about the future in that area. So we pressed a reset 2 years ago,
Gotcha.
which might go off and kind of delve into a little bit.
That makes sense. So one of the things you mentioned is that this digital revolution, it's like everyone is an AI company now, right? A digital revolution is not simply just the next wave of Industry 4. So if that's the case, what's the real reason that AI initiatives are failing to deliver this transformative impact despite all the money they're spending on technology?
Well, can I phone a friend, Michael? I hope you don't mind me. I like to have a little bit of a joke. But in all seriousness, I think there's a fundamental problem. There's a number of issues. Firstly, operating model. So therefore, when we look at an organization, and our measure for an operating model is it must solve its root cause. If you have reoccurring symptoms in your functions or in your organization, it's a significant problem because you can't put AI, and what we're seeing is you cannot put AI on top of frameworks. It's really as simple as that in many ways. And one of our kind of predictions is looking at the 2026, the year of the operating model. But the other part I think kind of linked into this, it's the saying about kind of, hey, turkeys wouldn't vote for Thanksgiving, right? So if we're bringing digital workers into our business, so our workforce is going off and changing, obviously, no longer just human. Well, how's that impacting me as the individual? Am I really going to be wanting to adopt AI when actually it's going to be taking part of my job away?
Yeah.
So we need to.
We've seen a lot of discussion about that for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So we need to be looking at the individual's journey, obviously, making sure we can get an alignment. Because if we're not able to do that, it's, like change fails a lot of the time because of the people in the operating model.
Yeah. So you've described AI, this whole concept of this AI, this transformation, as a mirror reflecting how value, work, and control operate inside the organizations through this space box framework, which I thought was a very interesting way of kind of describing this, which spans the past, present, tomorrow, and beyond. I keep thinking this beyond. All I think of is,
So it's Star Trek.
So how does this multidimensional lens reveal the blind spots that a single horizon approach to AI deployment misses?
Yeah, so you use the word framework, and I'm saying, hey, frameworks, bad news. So this is an operating model. Okay, so that's the first thing. So therefore, when we look, basically there's 6 open questions. So when we think about these 4 dimensions that we just brought in, so this is 4-dimensional thinking. So this is one way to analyze this.
So you want to make sure you have your cup of coffee before you start jumping into 4-dimensional thinking, is what you're saying?
Yeah. Well, you're going to find this very interesting. I'm sure your audience will too. But yeah, green tea. It's the only good thing I put in my body, incidentally. Everything else is bad, Michael. So we've got 4-dimensional thinking, as you've described, isn't it? So we've got kind of the past, the present, the tomorrow, and then there's a future piece, isn't there? There's a future state which goes beyond tomorrow, and there's only 6 open questions in the English language. I'm pretty sure it's the same in the American language too. So we've got these 6 open questions. So now what we have is that we've got 4 times 6. It goes off and gives us a permutation of 24. Logical so far, I hope.
Yep.
Now, where this then goes off and kind of takes us into, we talked about earlier about this digital revolution versus industry. So I think we can all see now that when we look at what's going on at a macroeconomic level, so that becomes a lens view. It's very important when we're thinking about AI. So we've got the macroeconomic impact. We then have to be thinking about the societal, the citizen. And then we drop down into the investor. So these 3 lenses become very, very, very important before we even get to the organization. And what our research shows is that these lens views aren't really considered, right? We tend to be looking at the organization, the functions, and the people.
Yeah. So
now what we have is that we've now got another block of 6 that comes in. And if my maths is correct, it'll take us, 140 something. Right. But if we then think about the functions, I'm just going to use this for context. Hey, we've got 10 functions in the organization. So now we've got another multiplier of 10.
Right.
So when we're into thinking about, when we think systems, and this I think is a major difference, when we're thinking system, all of this has to be taken into consideration if we're going to go off and avoid the blind spots.
Okay.
So this takes us into looking at how do we move from being commodity driven in solutions? Because essentially that's what's happened over the last few decades. Everything's become very commoditized. But AI really takes us into a design world. It needs to span these areas. And where this leads into essentially is that I talk about original augmented intelligence. So essentially, view this as human as an enterprise. So here I am, I've got my, everything that's packed in my brain, right? All different architectures and solutions and experience. So we put into place a kind of program, we call it Digital Me.
Okay.
So are we able to, we know that we want to go off and kind of build the human into AI, right? So that is going on. But let's think about it in the opposite direction of travel. Can we build the AI into the human? And this takes us into original augmented intelligence. So this goes off and amplifies. So these structures are all within, there's a foundational architecture. So all this is structured, which leads into essentially 3 economic models. So I've got my traditional 2,000 hours each year. I've then got my digital me, which is me. It's got my culture, values, behaviors, everything. It's a mirror, as you were saying, and that's 24/7, 100 times faster. And it's able to take this operating model that I've just gone off and kind of described, and is able to amplify that in a very different way to where I was just purely in my normal 2,000 hours, where I'd have to have lots and lots of people around in execution. And the final part about kind of the third economic model is that you plug 1 and 2 together. So my personal piece and my digital piece now becomes a third. So this therefore gets taken into an enterprise. So this also becomes part of an enterprise's execution. And my relationship now therefore comes when I look at, I prefer to talk about the AAA really, which is, automation, augmentation, artificial. And we can kind of bring that down into Gen AI and, agents and so on. But this now provides the interface. So my human piece with a very firm operating model then links in to a functional architecture. And we might come a bit more into that. This then connects into the operating model that the organization has. So go on. Yeah.
So when you're talking to operating model and with all those dimensions, depending on the function that the organizations have, because they had 10 functions, obviously there's companies with many, many more than that. This sounds like it could get very unwieldy to be able to understand how to slice and dice all of those, going from a macro, how's the macroeconomic affect this function in this area. It seems like either a lot of analysis that wouldn't necessarily lead to an outcome, or it'll be more difficult to get to the concise outcome because there are so many parameters. How do you manage that to get down to something that's more actionable?
Well. Firstly, one of the classic problems of the past is really about the interrelationships and the interdependencies. So that's always been a huge problem, isn't it? Even when the functions are very tight, like in the classic area that Bloor works with the vendors, what we see is research analysis. So the research, the analysis, having a disconnect into product marketing, into the design of the product. And we can also see that from our research that there can be a disconnect from product marketing into marketing and then into sales. So this becomes much easier to join up because AI enables us to put functional architecture into place that essentially joins up these dots. Because we're in a world now, and I think you're making a very, very good point, actually. The world, we've got the old world where we would say number 1 to number 2 to number 3, and we go off and join our dots. This world is not like that. This world is all the dots are on this page. How do we connect them? And how do we want to connect them? And how do they change for the different value propositions that come across? As an example, we might talk about this a little bit later. What's the investor value proposition? Is our proposition a macroeconomic level for a citizen? There's a disconnect. If you look at the organization, shareholders, it's about return on investment. But if you look at the organization delivers that on a cost and budget model. Mm-hmm. So straight away, we've got these disconnects. So what we're able to do is to look at joining up and understanding, if you like, kind of the different features, what the advantages are and the benefits for each of the different parties who are in this chain.
Gotcha.
Is that a good explanation? Do you want to go a bit?
It does make sense because, again, I was looking at it from a sheer volume of data perspective as you start to slice and dice this, because there are conflicting priorities depending on which angle you're approaching it from.
Yeah.
If you do go purely investor, all you need to do is shut down the company and you have the best quarter ever as it drains out all of the rest of the resources and it's all cash with no expense, right? But then there's no ongoing concern after that. So the investor has a great quarter, but then nothing after that. Versus we're going to do, say, sort of the current open AI model, which is we're going to burn as much of the investor's cash as we can to create the best product ever without any concern for potentially returning any value to that investor over time. So there's got to be some balance in there, right? As you start looking at each one of those dimensions. So
absolutely.
So it kind of gets into sort of this next question I have. So as we start talking about, there's like technology debt and labor debt and how they're quietly draining the productivity and cash flow, again, which is one angle of all this stuff, but it does happen. But you argue that AI can make these costs more visible and enable a financial redesign rather than headcount cuts. So can you share some real example where AI brought this to light and led to a different kind of investment plan within the organization?
Yeah, well, this is where I definitely have to phone a friend in all seriousness. Joke. Yeah, actually, I think I've got a fantastic example that we can kind of talk through, which also has a link into the previous question. Okay, all right. So let's pick up on private equity. So let's just this is a lot. So this is live. I'm not able to name the organization, but I can give all the context. Right. So essentially, the CFO is looking at, hey, I've got AI. I need to go off and take costs out because the investor wants to exit in 3 years' time. And the business is about a $200 million product business, essentially. Doesn't really kind of touch services. They say they're manufacturing. I would say small manufacturing, but kind of distribution. So the idea being, and basically the PE company just want to be able to kind of cut their cloth and get their investment back. That's the objective. Now, for that to happen, the basic plan is that let's go off and look at product, cost. So can we make things more efficient? That will help us to reduce down our bottom line cost. Can we simultaneously take our top line from 200 up to $240 million over this 36-month period? And that's really the broad kind of context of the plan. But the data points that they've got aren't necessarily the right data points either, because what we're faced with is that when we look at the organization, there's debt and there's liability. So when we look at the number, is that the business is very profitable, right? So it's making 50 plus points. But when we come into looking at the operating costs, margin goes down. So this 50 million number that they've got sitting is operational cost. There's quite a significant liability around the people. Do we need to kind of just hold first a second? Right. So there's a liability on the people, Michael. So this would be the layoff cost. And this layoff cost is off the balance sheet. It's not on the balance sheet. And that's a significant problem for the exit. But at the same time, what's happening is that they're taking their free cash, which actually could be invested to go off and really try and scale the business. They're having to use that free cash on those liabilities. So it's a double whammy. So therefore, when we think about the solution and we're speaking to kind of the CFO, we were able to bring in this area around the shareholder proposition piece. And typically that's quite unusual. because normally it is about the cost savings, bottom line and top line. So this now takes us into looking at how do we increase, the capability and the capacity in the business to look at growth, but in an additional way. So what we're able.
How do you layer then that AI in there to be able to bring that out in a way that not only focuses on the intent, which in this case is a 3-year exit.
Yeah.
How do you bring that out to be able to see all of those different data points and allow that transition or that financial investment to be made?
Yeah. So this is where it goes off and takes a really interesting kind of twist. So they're a product business. So it's a bit like, here's a mug, right? This is dumb. But can I make this mug intelligent? As an example, am I able to put something on this that every time I pick it up, it monitors what I'm drinking? What might be the benefit for someone that might be in a care home, as an example? Unfortunately, my father got dementia, right? But if I'd known that every time he picked up his fork as being a piece of data, that data was getting fed back, I'd know if he was eating or not. So AI enables us to think about making things which were kind of pretty dumb. We can go off and begin to make them intelligent. So that becomes quite important. So now we're looking at the product range and what is there within the products that we can make more intelligent. And if we're making it more intelligent, it begins to move us away from product into outcomes. So now what we have is that we've still got all the existing propositions that are there, but now we're able to think about different additional propositions that can actually help them to go off and capture a more significant part of the market share. Because now they're moving into this outcome world. It's no longer here's a product, go off and do it yourself. That still remains, but now we're able to think about what's the outcomes that the buyer wants.
So I think this kind of gets into the kind of discussion. We talked some about this shift, and you mentioned getting AI into the human. So in a recent executive roundtable, you mentioned that the shift from human in the loop, which I think a lot of people are sort of understanding, an automation happens until something needs a decision or some other process where a human can come in and validate or whatever. You're kind of advocating for the flip of that, AI in the loop of the humans. So what does it imply then for talent development, leadership development, entry-level hires, leadership pipelines, all that stuff, as you're looking at the way that your operating model is transforming based on your financial reengineering?
So the key thing is always around the operating model. The human also needs to have an operating model in the same way an organization has, because this is how you go off and get the connectivity. Okay? So really, you've got to have the trust in the operating model. If you can't trust your operating model, you can't trust your data, you can't trust AI. So this is a really imperative point. So it's the operating model is where the trust is. It's no longer in areas like master data management. Everything is now getting disrupted. So the operating model is crucial. Now, when we begin to think about the people impact piece now, so this is, and if you recall, I was talking about how an individual can have a number of different economic models. So as an example, let's say that my human me, I'm working 5 days each week. But now as a result of digital workers coming into the business, I'm only needed 3 days each week. So the thing is now, well, what do I do? So this becomes a labor debt then. Because if I'm still on full payroll and my productivity now is only 3 days, just picture this in your business case. Just think about the business case that that we can go to market with. We're able to say, look, AI does create a debt. Technology has created labor debt over a significant period of time. That's why we see the gap between GDP growth and productivity and the lack of job growth. All these metrics, all these data points are out there, and they're much more easily, you can get to the data much more easily and digest that data because AI helps us to do that, what you're looking for. So the proposition now begins to kind of go off and change because an individual's now able to, they should be thinking about themselves as a business in this new world. Because one of the things, death and taxes guaranteed for everyone. De-employment is also guaranteed. It's the third golden rule of life. And we see that we've got attrition rates, 47% in the US, 33% here in the UK. We've got a younger generation that comes through who are not like us old days that would be going off and staying with an organization for a long time. So as a consequence of this, right? So visualize, my time decreases and I'm able to now work somewhere else. My digital me, if I have a digital me, my digital me can remain in the business even after I've exited the business. So I was speaking to a CTO just yesterday, and literally his time has gone down to 10% doing the same job.
Wow.
10%. So now he's got this portfolio, and this is with a major global organization. I think that we ran some, we've been doing cross-functional C-suite dinners, as you know, all part of our kind of research, all in this area. And basically, and I was shocked. It was something like about 75, 80% of the people around the table at each dinner we've had have a secondary job. It's astonishing.
That's very surprising. That's very surprising because we're not talking about entry-level workers who are doing Uber on the side here, are we?
No, precisely. Now, to be fair, we need to understand what that secondary job is. It could be an ad, it could be charity-based, so it's not necessarily they're going off and, because you can't have a conflict of interest. That's the other thing, is that you can't be this kind of moonlighter that goes off and gets paid by company A, and you're going off and also getting paid by company B, which is another issue that exists. So it becomes important here to kind of get the individual to understand that they actually are a business, and maybe the employer is actually a customer. And that customer can continue with them because we no longer have to be working 5 days a week. And I think in closing, just one final point, and I'm sure that you and your audience will relate to this. When we bring a digital worker into our organization, we know what the outcomes are. It's almost like here's the outcome job description, and here's what we're prepared to pay for this. See the disconnect with the human? The human, we need to be doing the same thing. We need to be saying to the human, hey, here's an outcome job description. Our research shows it's almost impossible for an organization to go off and write an outcome-based job. Why is that? Because the organization doesn't understand the relationships between output and outcome as they flow through the organization. AI solves that problem. In the functional architecture, yes.
So, okay, that brings up a different kind of question then. When we start looking at, you mentioned, your digital me.
Yeah.
Maybe someone that is developed, trained, whatever, enhanced because of the real me in my organization. That, in your case, that person who's now working 10% of their time, or maybe decides to retire, where the digital me can continue. That resource is still part of the broader resource plan for the organization. They have an amount of work they want to get done, the outcomes that maybe someone is, smart enough or clever enough to be able to define. But that resource mix now becomes a big issue because there's certainly things that the digital me is probably not really good at. One of them being face-to-face conversations, right? Yeah. So we have now a different kind of resource mix that's required and a different kind of thinking. How does an organization look at that from a future state? We talk about the past, the present, the future, but then the ongoing, like way out in the blue yonder. How do you plan for that now as things are evolving so quickly?
So let's just take another flow, right? And this flow is about conversation, dialogue, analysis, and options. So this flow exists in every single business. Right? Now visualize this. You have your digital me, and I have my digital me. What might be going on between both of those before we even have to have our face-to-face? How does this help us to come, conversation is good, but everyone's always so busy, because essentially we're also busy because the organization's always under-resourced, right? So we don't really have the conversational time, right? But now what we're able to do is that we can get the dialogue and we can get the analysis happening in a digital-orientated way. So that becomes really interesting now, because when we get together on a face-to-face base, which can be at a conversation to set the journey, and then we're getting at the end about when we're looking at what options are available to us. So this really kind of changes what we have is that, the workforce is no longer just human. That's really one of the bottom lines that we need to really understand here. The workforce now has changed. And therefore also being able to understand, when we look at someone, I don't know about yourself, Michael, but very often what we see is that we can see, hey, there's a third of the work that we shouldn't be doing. Then we've got our table stakes. Hey, we need to deliver this to be at the table. That's the other third. Then we've got another third that sits on top, which is the stuff that goes off and makes a real difference. So just visualize now how this begins to go off and change. If we can go off and increase that top line third to 50 or 60 or 70 or 80, and you have to bear in mind what's also important here is that the organization's paying the same price for each of these third areas. So if I'm doing something I ought not to be doing, the organization's paying me. And if I do something that's exceptional, I'm getting. And why would talent want to go off and do that? If I'm talented, I don't want to be in that model. And why would an organization want to be in this? Because what we need to do, we need to be looking at the labor force, and we've got an oversupply of labor. Everyone can see that now. So what happens in oversupply? Price goes down. So now you've got a problem. I'm going a little bit back now into this labor debt, right? Because now you're sitting on labor that's overpriced. And how do you manage that with someone who's coming into the business? So what we've got to do is that we've got to be kind of rethinking, right? We have to be thinking about dynamic pricing coming into play for labor. The business wants dynamic pricing in its supply chain. It wants dynamic pricing in its go-to-market. The golden dream for a shareholder investor and for finance is not to have fixed costs. So therefore, how do we go off and use dynamic pricing? Are we able to go off and get to a variable pricing model, which we can peg to a metric, say like revenue or income? So no longer does the finance have the job of going off and managing this problem gap. No longer is the business facing this cost and budget mechanism to go off and deliver ROI back to the shareholder. These things get aligned. So what we need to do, I think I'm going to flip all the way back to your opening question, which is we've got to connect these areas together. The macroeconomically impact what we do socially, right? And it connects into the investor. The solution's got to encompass all of these areas.
So when we talk through that, I conceptually understand everything you've mentioned, but the transition from the current to that future state seems like it would be exceptionally difficult. How does an organization even begin to start that process?
Well, so let's look at the existing, what happens at the moment, right? So we know that there's huge failure in transformations. So we need to understand about, hey, we've got the strategy and we've got our tactical position day to day. So the first thing is to look at what's the bridge that goes off and kind of links both of these things together. Because if it's like some loose pontoon bridge crossing a river or a rope, we've got to focus on that bridge and think about that connection. And this plays back into what we're kind of saying earlier, is that from the research and the analysis, it leads us into the design. And therefore that leads us into a build and an operate. Because this is now non-standard. So you're looking at the relationship between the tactical day-to-day, which is where we've got the standard operation, and where we have something non-standard being built. Because this will then transfer. And that's really a kind of position that kind of Bloor's gone off and adopted. Where we're kind of saying it, look, we can sit between the vendor and the enterprise, because you need these skill sets. And this isn't just like some program that you can come up with and think, hey, I'm going to execute this in 90 days. Right? You're able to look at the programs that you've got around, the projects that are going off and running around, let's say, productivity or cost optimization, or we want to create more capability. And that's really what the drive should be with AI. If we're going to just go off and use AI, if we're just going to go off in this digital revolution and drive just more, drive down cost, we're not going to get growth, because we can only get growth in our economies if we have disposable income.
Right.
Without you and I, if our disposable income drops, that's a huge problem for the economy, and we can see it, can't we? But it's the same also for organizations. So if the organization's disposable income goes off and kind of drops, and that's why we need to look at the solutions around the people. And so this debt and liability, and this takes us into looking at kind of financial engineering as being part of a proposition. And I could go off now and kind of bore your audience a little bit in that area, but this is very, very important, because if we go back into the originality of outsourcing, outsourcing really started in the in the 80s. A lot of people think it's 90s driven. It's not 90s driven. It starts in the 80s. And there's a fantastic story I could go off and tell you to do with General Motors and EDS, which is really relevant for today. Because if we've got time, or you want to invite me back, I can tell you more about that, because it's, these problems that we've got today are the same problems that existed a long time ago. So this build, operate, transfer piece has been around,
so
4 or 5 decades.
What would be the first practical step that an organization can take to reevaluate how they see labor? Does this happen in the HR department? Does this happen in the finance department? Where can an organization practically start this kind of rethought of what their labor looks like?
I think there's a cross piece here which runs across finance, HR, and technology. So when we look at the data points, we can go off and get the financial data. As an example, hey, what's the liability? Because this becomes very important, isn't it? Actually, this is a very, very important point. You'll have seen organizations talk about, due to AI, I'm doing these layoffs. And this is a market announcement, from either FTSE or Fortune-based business. Right? That's a major problem for them, because now you're announcing that AI is going to go off and have an impact on your workforce. So if I've got 300,000 people and I'm saying, hey, I've spent 3 billion taking 10,000 away, what's the regulator going to go off and talk about? What's going to happen from a regulator viewpoint? Because you've made the announcement to the market. These are all the disconnects, Michael, that are happening. So when we look at maybe a program coming through around automation or augmented artificial, you've got the CEO making a market announcement on it. We need to be very careful about these things. It's very, very important. So we need to understand, we can tangibly get to understanding the debt and understanding the liability. And that also involves speaking to the people themselves. Because there's an upside for AI with someone. I've just talked about the 3 economic models. This is a huge opportunity for them to think about their own personal goals, where they are in their journey. There's what's the cash I need? So essentially, why do we do what we do? Right? Some people don't need money, so I'm in that camp. I don't need the money, so I love doing what I do. But for many others, there's a cash flow number that needs to come into their bank account. When we look at this cash flow number, we've got to help them to understand it's the disposable income number is the most important number in that cash number. So the more that you can increase that disposable income, and what role does AI have to play in helping them to achieve that? So now I'm able to work portfolio based, I'm able to be outcome, and I've got these different economic models. This becomes a big driver for the person. So just in terms of closing, just visualize this. I'm paid 100, I'm working 5 days each week. But then I speak to you and we've explained about what we can go off and do. And we say, well, actually, I can do all my work in 3 days each week. Would it be fantastic for the business to go off and only pay for 4? So now they get the same outcomes that have been getting done, that have been paying for 5 days a week. So the price point now becomes 80 as opposed to 100. So the individual's now going off and generating time that they can use in a different way. And the organization's gone off and got a 20% saving. And we're no longer now getting into looking at this debt and this liability, because what we're doing is, this is where fusion work comes in. We're fusing the digital and the human worker together on a joined up operating model. So we're able to take the individual on the journey. And this is fantastic, from a knowledge viewpoint. Why would I want to give my knowledge to a digital worker when I might lose my job? But if I'm the digital worker, I'm going to give the knowledge, because I still need automation. I still need generative AI. I still need agentic. But I'm now able to be in the business, and that's great macroeconomically, because now we don't have to worry about digital workers don't pay any income tax. They don't pay social services. They don't go off and pay a sales tax or VAT here in the UK. So this is great news, right? And that's what's important. We need to join this up, and we're able to do it coming down from the top and coming up from the bottom. You're able to do these things simultaneously, and going back to the bridge, that's what connects the strategy with the tactical day-to-day, because now we're focusing on that bridge.
And it sounds like there's responsibilities that are apparent for everyone. So for the employee to understand that, in fact, there are parts of your role, your current role, that are extremely valuable to your employer. And there are parts of your role that are very transactional in nature, which your digital me probably would be more well suited for. So understanding how to split those, or how to adapt to that new reality, is really on the employee's standpoint, right? They need to understand that. The employers need to understand how best to connect the digital work that they're getting through all this technology that they've invested in a way that provides them that transactional speed and efficiency that they're looking to be able to respond to their customers in a more timely and cost-effective way, but realizing that perhaps the strategy or the other things that humans are strong at might not be there with just the pure efficiency, right?
Well, yeah, precisely. So we can dig down into that area just for a few moments. So, I mean, how many clever people do you know, or do we all know, that are doing pretty dumb jobs which are rule based?
Yeah,
big problem. isn't it? So therefore, when we think about, so when we're whether it's, all this rule-based work isn't going to get done by a human. So now what do we now do? Right? Is that the individual hopefully has got creativity and flair. And that's what we want. We want this creativity and flair. And I'd love to come back and show you kind of Digital Me Live, because what you would see is the creativity and flair connecting into the rule-based activities. So the things around the operating model, the structures that the organization's going off and saying, this is how we operate. Your digital version of you connects into that, because this is creativity and flair, because it amplifies the human. So it's very, very important to understand the difference, that's why it's kind of original-based intelligent, So therefore, coming back to this individual now, you're able to work out a pathway for them linked in to looking at this merge of the workforce, which is digital and human. Because, like strategic work, HR will have strategic workforce planning. Now, clearly it doesn't work because we've got debt and liability, we have hire fire, so we're not able to manage the liability and the asset curve of the people. So now what we're doing is that we can manage that liability and asset curve of the people linked in to this relationship through fusion work. So the whole, and this is what this comes back into kind of Industry 4 is one pathway. Our view at Bloor is that organizations that are going down that pathway, make sure you understand the pathway you're going down. There's a very different pathway if we think that we're actually in a digital revolution. But the industry says, no, we're not. We're in Industry 4. I mean, Bloor, we've made the decision. No, we're not. We're in a digital revolution. We can support you in your Industry 4 road, if that's what we want, because you will need a fallback plan.
Right.
So this digital piece is a very, very, very different world altogether, this digital revolution.
So if you were to give the most important piece of information to the listeners right now that they need to take away from this, on an employee side, so two different factors. On an employee side, the most important thing that employees need to take away from this, and then if you were an executive, what would be the most important piece that they should take away from our discussion today?
Mm-hmm. I think the employee needs to look at themselves and really analyze just how effective am I really? And I'm only saying this for context. Hey, I've got a nice easy time in my role because I can kind of do it standing on my head. I could do this role in 50% of my time, right? Be honest with yourself in regard to that, because your value proposition to a future employer is going to be very different from the value proposition that is there today. Understand that organizations, why would an organization want to rent you with liability and create a debt? If you're able to have a different model for how you can engage from a monetization viewpoint to lower risk, to have an outcome-based model, that is much more attractive to the employer. So let's understand where you are. And I think the other part too is that means don't jump into ChatGPT, which might seem a really odd thing to go off and say. Actually, look at the education, understand how AI is going to impact. It's back to this Industry 4 in digital piece. So
for the employer then?
For the employer, right, it starts with them at the very top. Do you understand? So when if we believe that having original augmented intelligence is beneficial, right? So that's the first thing. Do I want to keep on the same model that I've had in the past, where I've got my 2,000 hours and that's how I monetize? Or can I actually go off because I'm being hired for my brain? That's why I'm being hired. So therefore, can we capture that? The answer is yes. And then you get into how solid is the foundational architecture to capture that on. because that's where the change should be coming from. And it's like what we're saying about the CTO earlier. He's doing the oversight that was needed in this business. It's now 10% of his time. It's only 10%. And that seems phenomenal, doesn't it? It just seems the most unbelievable piece. It doesn't mean that he doesn't come in and top up. Because that's the part about that. That's about the flexibility. You might only need me 2 days this month, but maybe 10 days next month. So the leader has got to go off and be the first to understand about the outcomes. We've got to be outcome driven and understand that relationship. If I'm in sales, if I'm in a sales team, I can go off and hit my sales number. So I've done my outcome. But when it comes into the function, it's an output now, isn't it? It's an output there. So the whole function's got to go off and achieve. And then it's the same when it moves from the function to the organization. And if we relate that outcome piece to the shareholder now, the shareholder just wants two very simple things. I want my dividend and I want my share price. And the organization's duty is to deliver that. Mm-hmm. It's arguably the most important customer that the organization has.
Well, we've certainly seen that from a Wall Street, High Street perspective, right? But yeah, definitely so. Richard, I appreciate all of the insights that you've provided for us today. You've gone well beyond where we expected us to go with our conversations, mainly because I took us off.
Yeah, absolutely. You're pulling these curveballs at me, Michael.
But this was a great conversation. I really appreciate you being here, and thank you again for joining us on Transform Now.
Yeah, I've thoroughly enjoyed it. Can I say one final thing, Michael, before we depart?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I think this piece around Transform Now, we think there's a final transformation journey to go off and happen, which is to be in a permanent state of reinvention and innovation, to be mutable. So people be mutable, organization be mutable, and have an operating model that delivers it, which is a mutable operating model. And you and I, we need a mum, and so does the organization. So be mutable.
And that's a great way to end the podcast. Thank you again, Richard.
Thanks for listening to Transform Now, the podcast from SS&C Blue Prism. You can find all of our episodes on your favorite podcast channel, as well as YouTube. To stay on top of the hottest topics in the world of agentic automation, subscribe now. The future of work is here.